to promote responsible resource allocation through the state's annual financial plan, work to the best that we can to try to ensure the fiscal and financial integrity of the state. There have been about 32 directors of finance since 1927. Michael Cohen is the current director. We have about 450 employees, virtually all of whom are career civil servants. They're not, they don't come in with a particular partisan or policy bias. There's a handful of individuals who are gubernatorial appointees, and we serve at the pleasure of the governor. Or depending upon our revenue forecast, we may serve at the displeasure of the governor. We have a couple different program areas. For those of you familiar with Washington, the Office of Management and Budget were set up somewhat similarly. We have different budget program areas. They call it paths. We've got one that does budget planning preparation, one that oversees corrections, the judiciary, and general government, one that deals with education, both K-12 and higher ed, health and human services, natural resources, capital outlay, transportation, and local government. Other areas that we have are economic research and forecasting, which we'll get into in a little bit. Revenue forecasting, always of critical interest. Demographic research, the state's version of the U.S. Census Bureau is within our department. And we also have the Office of State Audit and Evaluation, who goes out and does fiscal and policy audits throughout the year. Let me kind of see if we get this right. And it worked. To give you an overview of what we're looking at in broad strokes, we came out with, in terms of what we, relative to the budget that we passed last summer, the revenues are down by about $5.8 million. It's not all in one fiscal year, but we do it in a 3-year kind of fiscal cycle. We had to come up with about $3.2 billion in budget solutions to address that. One of the things you're probably asking is, well, that doesn't even happen. You get a problem 5.8 revenues with 3.2 solutions. We also do have positive carry-in balances, similar to if you start your month off with a positive balance in your checking account. So if you're wondering why those numbers don't line up, there's a reason for it. And we also preserve some of the administration of the governor's core achievements that we'll get into in a minute. The revenues, the tide has begun to turn. Even though we are still, as you can see, showing that we've got growth in our revenues, we are showing slower growth in net revenues. It's the second straight downward revision of our revenue forecast in the past 12 months. All of what we call the big three revenues, personal income tax, sales tax, and corporation taxes are down. Why is that? Why are we seeing this kind of slumping in terms of growth? A couple of reasons. Number one, since we did our last forecast last spring as part of the budget that was adopted last June, cash receipts that came into the second half of 2016, compared to the last forecast before this January's revenues from June through December last year came in about $2 billion below where we projected they were going to be. The second thing is lower wage rate. Post-budget employment growth has been tilted towards or heavy on those workers who are either new to the workforce or re-entering the workforce. That plus minimum wage means that a greater share of the wages went to lower income workers. If you like income distribution, that's a good thing. If you don't like it, if you like revenue growth, and that isn't necessarily a good thing in terms of high-end taxpayers, which we'll get to in a minute. So the solutions that we put forward are kind of threefold. One is to adjust Proposition 98, and that's the constitutional funding formula for K through 12 schools and community colleges that the voters approved back in 1988. Without action to account for that revenue drop-off that we mentioned a moment ago, the appropriations that we made in the last two budgets would have over-appropriated what would have been the constitutional guarantee. So we've had to take Proposition 98 down relative to the Budget Act by about $1.7 billion. Even with that, we are still showing growth, we'll look at this in a minute as well, in K through 14 spending on a year-over-year basis of $2.1 billion. The second thing that we did is basically we recaptured a lot of one-time uncommitted spending. There are certain things that we included as part of last year's budget where we said we were going to spend money. We haven't done it. We pulled it back in January. So we said we're not going Probably the two biggest ones are there was $300 million that was associated with the renovation or replacement of state office buildings here in Sacramento. Part of the overall state's infrastructure, even though it doesn't sound like roads or school buildings, it is part of the state's infrastructure. But we said, we can't do that right now based on what we're looking at. The other thing is affordable housing. We had put in about $400 million and set it aside for affordable housing contingent upon the legislature taking some actions that in the governor's and the administration's view would have sped up or streamlined the ability to be able to get more housing, more affordable housing on the market. The legislature chose not to adopt that measure, so we pulled that $400 million back in terms of the January budget. The third thing that we did, we note here, is about $600 million in constraining spending growth. A lot of that has to do with basically not funding bills that were signed into law. We realized that there are a number of measures that we simply can't afford to finance that require appropriations. So we said we're basically going to hold off on providing funding for a number of these bills. The bills stay on the books, they're just not being funded. We've also done a couple of other things to constrain spending growth. Two probably the most that have gotten the most attention or the most criticism, since we're not going to put a happy face on everything we're going to do. Our number one, we proposed a one-year pause in rate increases for child care providers. And the second thing is we proposed a gradual phase out of what's called the middle class scholarship program, where those individuals who currently receive scholarships under the program are going to keep getting them, but we're proposing not to make any new enrollments starting the fiscal year begins on July the 1st. To give you a picture, an idea of kind of where things come from and where they go. Revenues, basically, as I said, the big three that we were taking in terms of what finances state government. Personal income tax is the biggest, obviously. It's roughly 2/3 of the state's revenues that come in through personal income tax, which is why April is the coolest month for taxpayers, but the most critical month for the state. Sales and use tax comes in second, and corporation tax is third. Where the money goes, you see a lot of reports from the Public Policy Institute of California where they survey and say where people think most of the money goes in the state budget. What's the highest fall of the dollars? A lot of people think it's corrections. They think we spend most of our money on corrections. Not the case. No, it's K-12 schools from the state's general fund. That's partly a function of that constitutional measure I talked about, Proposition 98 a minute ago, that says there's, roughly speaking, about 40% of all general fund revenues go to K-12 schools and community colleges. Health and Human Services is next. The biggest one in there is Medi-Cal, the state's Medicaid program. There are about just over 14 million people who are getting their health care or enrolled in Medi-Cal. That translates into about roughly 1 out of every 3 Californians. We've got a little over 38 million people in the state in total. Roughly 1 out of every 3 get their health care through Medi-Cal. And that's another thing we'll get into in a minute. Higher education, UC, CSU, and the Strike Community Colleges come in third at about $14.6 million. And then corrections comes in fourth at about roughly $11 million. And everything else, what some of them like snarky former bosses used to call budget dust. But very important, is what falls into the other $10 billion. I mentioned Proposition 98. It kind of rises and falls with the face of the state's economy and the state's revenues. And you can see that during the recession in 08 and 09, school funding took a big hit because as revenues went down, so did the funding guarantee for Proposition 98. When you can see that a couple of reasons for that in the administration's view or why that came back. One of them was an economy that began to slowly rebound from the Great Recession in 08 and 09. And the second would be the passage of Proposition 30 back in 2012, which basically put at that time was a temporary personal income tax surcharge on high-income wage earners in California, which was extended this past year by the voters as well. So that's one of the reasons, those are the two reasons that we've seen some significant increases in funding for K-12 education and community colleges in recent years. Some of the core achievements that are preserved in the budget, even though we've got challenging times. More money for education, as I noted, you saw a minute ago. K-12 schools and community colleges are going to be getting getting an additional $2.1 billion on a year-over-year basis. We have 4% increases built in for both the University of California and for the California State University systems. Over the past 5 years, since the 12-13 fiscal year, we've added about $818 million for UC, about $1 billion for CSU, and about $1.8 billion for community colleges. But one of the things that we're doing in higher education isn't just an issue of funding, important though that is. One of the things that we've been working on, that I've been spending a lot of time talking about the last few days, is the efforts that the governor and the administration have been making with both UC and CSU to do things institutionally and change the operation of the system to do things that will help improve the times to graduation for students. Because if they can't get the courses that they need to get out of CSU in 2 years or get out of the UC campus in 4 years, that adds on to not only the time that they've got to spend in school, that adds on to the tab for tuition, it also adds up to the tab for additional student debt for themselves or their parents. And it also adds up in terms of additional cost of living. And we can get into that in a minute because you may have seen some of the stories that came out yesterday about debt-free college. My daughter's home from spring break. I think my inside voice says it's a swell idea, but how are you going to pay for it is another issue. Counteracting the effects of poverty, the minimum wage, and I realize there are differences on this, something that the governor signed and the administration supported. It's scheduled to increase to $11 an hour in 2018 and $15 an hour over time. We have the state's first ever state-owned income tax credit in its second year is coming up. Individuals qualify if their income is less than $14,000. The number of credits issued were about 212,000 as of last month. That's up 42% from the same time last year. Healthcare expansion under the Affordable Care Act, again, something we'll get to in a minute. In the first year, it was about 1.4 million Californians who were covered, who were childless adults who were covered under the expansion of Medi-Cal under the Affordable Care Act. We're projecting about 4.1 million people to be covered next year, again, under the current rules of the road of the Affordable Care Act, an issue we'll get to in a second. Paying down debts and liabilities. You mentioned pensions, sir. If you look at everything that's out there, the entire scope of the state's liabilities, you're talking about $240 billion worth of fee, of which about $236 billion are related to state retirement costs. Something that the administration has been working on for a number of years to try to finally confront some of these issues. In 2012, Governor spearheaded the legislature passed something called PEPRA, which is the Public Employees Pension Reform Act, which we believe over the long haul is going to save billions by capping benefits, increasing the retirement age for state workers, and requiring employees to pay half their pension costs. In 2014, we passed, and the governor spearheaded legislation to work on the state teacher retirement system, which is separate, which we think is going to put it into a solvent situation over a 3-decade horizon. Last year, or 2016, we began to pre-fund retiree health care to start addressing that $74 billion liability over the next 3 decades. And in the budget that we've proposed for the coming fiscal year, we have a little over $250 million to address and fund the lowering of the so-called discount rate, or the anticipated rate of return that PERS is expecting from their stock market investments. Because the lower their rate of returns are scheduled to be, the higher we have to make in terms of the state's general fund cost. And there's been a lot of debate and discussion about what PERS, which is independent of the state government, the legislative and the executive branch really control PERS, what their assumptions are regarding what they think their investment returns are going to be, which has a direct effect not only on the fund as a whole, but how much the state has to put in terms of general fund to be able to meet its obligations. Combating climate change, clearly something that's at the forefront of the governor's mind. The state's goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% relative to what their 1990 levels were, to do that by the year of 2030. Cap and trade, the option to reduce emissions. We've appropriated about $3.4 billion of cap and trade proceeds to date. The budget assumes a legislative measure to extend the cap and trade program authority beyond 2020. Once that is approved, we propose $2.2 billion in expenditures from cap and trade auction proceeds for things such as sustainable communities, high-speed rail, a variety of issues in there. Infrastructure, very critical and very much in the headlines in the wake of the scare that we had at the Oroville Dam. The deferred maintenance alone on the state's infrastructure, written broadly, is about $78 billion. In the last two budgets, we've appropriated about $960 million for the most critical deferred maintenance, things like levees. In regarding transportation, something that is currently before the legislature in terms of what the legislators may or may not do on that. We anticipate or expect, according to some of those studies, that there's an annual cost to an individual of about $760 in vehicle repair based upon the condition of the state's roads. The governor's proposal would provide about $4.2 billion annually to improve road and highway maintenance. So those are some of the key areas in terms of infrastructure that are all encompassed in the budget. Potential risks to the state budget. Donald Rumsfeld, who was George Bush Jr.'s Secretary of Defense, used to talk about things that were known knowns and known unknowns. We can do our best to try to forecast what's going to happen here in the state, here in the country, in the world with the economy and revenues, but we always try to expect the unexpected. And so there are three things that I would point to that I referenced a little bit earlier that are kind of the unknowns that can affect which way the budget's going to go. First is how long is the state's economic recovery going to last? Second is what's the stock market going to do and why does that affect the state budget? And third is what is going to happen in Washington, D.C. The first point that I made a minute ago regarding the economic recovery, the average length of an economic expansion in the state in the post-World War II era is about 5 years. We're 3 years past the use-by date or the shelf date on that. So it's been a slow, relative to other economic expansions like in the early 1990s after the collapse of the aerospace industry. This has been a slow, gradual recovery. But again, relative to the length of past economic expansions, this one's run longer than you can see the averages have been since World War II. So that's something that we're mindful of. The legislature here in Washington, D.C. hasn't been able to repeal the economic cycle, so it's not a question of if we're going to see a downturn in our view. It's a question of when, and that's one of the reasons that the governor has been very cautious about committing the state to higher ongoing levels of spending that may not be able to be sustained over the long haul. Capital gains, extremely unpredictable. The hardest thing, hands down, in the budget to forecast. And the question is, why the heck is the stock market making us scratch our heads and stay up late at night and grind our loafers? A couple of reasons. We saw the revenue chart a couple of minutes ago that two-thirds, actually a little more than two-thirds of all of the revenue that the state takes in this general fund comes from personal income tax. If you look at the most recent comprehensive data from the Franchise Tax Board, which is from the year 2014, there were a total of about 15.7 million tax returns that were filed in the state. Of that amount, 1%, just 1% of those returns was responsible or generated 48%, nearly half of all of that personal income tax that was generated entirely in the state of California that year. And for that very narrow sliver of taxpayers, that 1%, or the 1%, as people call them, most of their income, unlike most of us, isn't generated from wages and salaries. It is very heavily influenced by things like capital gains and stock options. And so when the market is doing really well, we do really well. Those of us who were around in 99 and 2000 remember the dot-com boom when revenues were riding a rocket and things couldn't go wrong. Well, the dot-com boom kind of went bust, and with that, revenues went off the cliff overnight. And unfortunately, at that time, the state had built on thinking that those revenues were going to go on forever and ever. They said, let's spend more money, and let's do it on an ongoing basis because these are great programs. Regardless of the merits of those programs, the revenues went off the cliff, and yet there was still a higher ongoing level of spending that could not be sustained. And that created the revenue gap that came in late in Governor Davis's era, and then Governor Schwarzenegger took over. It began to close, and then in 2008, the Great Recession hit. The market collapsed. The real estate market, I don't think anybody here needs to be reminded how bad things were in Southern California regarding that. And the revenues school funding under the Constitution, and the revenue definitely went down as well. So what happens on Wall Street has a very definite, direct effect, for good and for bad, in the state's fortunes. Don't have a slide for it, but question, what's going to happen in Washington? Probably the biggest thing that's in the middle of the headlines right now is what's going to happen. Now, the debate is over. The replacement mechanism for the Affordable Care Act is currently before the Congress. You've seen some of the estimates from the Congressional Budget Office that they said that they believe over 10 years, 24 million people may lose their health insurance. We have not done a fiscal analysis of that bill yet. We are working on it. We hope we will have something fairly shortly. What we did in the budget to address this issue is, one of the things we didn't, just to back up, under the budget, we are projecting, as I said a minute ago, about 4.1 million Californians are going to be covered under Medi-Cal through the Affordable Care Act's optional expansion population, as it's called. That's roughly about $14 billion, I believe. Let me check my numbers in terms of what we anticipate we're going to receive in federal funds. And there's a state component that goes with that, but it's about, the general fund next year is about $1.5 billion that the state is going to spend in this year, because Medi-Cal has Medicaid, which is a joint state-federal program. The federal share of that, just for the optional expansion alone, not all 14 million people on Medi-Cal in California, but just for that 4.1 million in the optional expansion population, is about $19 billion. So the question is, what happens if the Affordable Care Act is repealed? Nobody is thinking that if it were to be repealed, there's not a big switch in Washington that says funding's cut off, it's not going to happen, so $19 billion is going to evaporate. So knowing that the talk in Washington is going to be repeal or replace, we didn't take $19 billion out of higher education or K through 12 schools and said, we don't know what's going to happen, so we're going to cut you until we figure out what's happening. We budgeted under what we call a current law budget, which is until and unless there is a change in federal law that has been enacted by Congress and signed by the President, we budget under the rules of the road. The rules of the road right now are the Affordable Care Act as it's been enacted and state statutes that go with it. What we have said is that it poses a significant fiscal pressure to the state, just because whatever, we don't know yet what the fiscal implications are going to be. It could very well be changed. It may not pass. We don't know yet. But we in the Legislative Analyst Office, which is independent from us, which is an arm of the legislature that evaluates the budget and fiscal issues, have also said, we can't quantify it yet, but it's a pressure that you ought to be aware of as you're making your budget considerations, because depending upon what happens in Washington, that could have a very significant impact on the state. Because, again, we don't expect they're going to turn off the federal spigot overnight, but to give you an order of magnitude, when you're looking at that much in terms of federal dollars that is dealing with the state populations on Medi-Cal now, if that decreases over time, we don't know if it will, over what period of time. What happens? Could the state somehow, make up the difference? Be pretty tough. What happens to the scope of benefits that goes as individuals? Does it go back to county care? All of those things are what I talked about a minute ago that Don Rumsfeld called known unknowns. And so we are watching very carefully, as no doubt many of you are, what the debate and discussion is in Washington on that. And just to kind of close up things before I open it up, one of the things that we're mindful of going forward, again looking at the history of the state, is that every time that we've had a pretty good run-up, it's been followed by a pretty bad downturn. You can see what the history's been going back, and you can see those years that we talked about a minute ago, the dot-com boom, which is those nice black bars from a long, long time ago back on the left side before the dot-com bust hit and the revenues took a nosedive. We got back up to sea level, and then you can see what happened during the Great Recession, 08, 09, 09, 10, and then we slowly started working our way back up. We've been able to get above sea level, but as I said, the budget gap, that band, that red bar over on the far right-hand side represents the $1.6 billion that's a budget gap that we have to close. And above and beyond that, we need to set aside some money for a minimal reserve for economic uncertainties for natural disasters. One of the things that you're all too familiar with in Santa Clarita area and in your district is what happens during fire season. And if the cost of fighting fires outstrip what's in the budget for CAL FIRE. That doesn't mean we ground the air tankers and we stop the hand crews. We got cash, we'll keep them going. But from a budgetary basis, we got to cover those additional costs, and we draw down on the state's budget reserve, what's called the Special Fund for Economic Uncertainties, to do that. So not only do we have to close that gap on the right, we have to provide for what we think is a minimally prudent reserve for things like if wildfires outstrip the cost for our budget. That is a very brief windshield tour of the budget. I hope you have not been knocked into narcolepsy. I will be happy to, as I said, try to answer, explain, or relate any questions that you may have regarding the budget, or anything else regarding the Department of Finance.
I know it's the last segment, but come on, a couple questions.
No, if you guys are, if you got to get on the bus and get to a cancel.
No, we're not letting you up to the radio.
What's your question? All right, Jerry Buckley with College of the Canyons, community college system. One of the traditional problems we have is that the state gives us a faculty obligation. We have to hire X number of people, but we don't have any funding besides the base to hire any faculty in the proposed budget. What's your issue with cutting Prop 98? Do you have any suggestions for where we might look for the funding?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not familiar with that particular nuance of the CCC budget. Scott and the staff are happy, if you've got some stuff that you want to relay to me, I would be happy to relay that or communicate that to our staff that has the CCC budget. Again, as I've noted, one of the things that we had to do in terms of dealing with that budget gap was to take Prop 98 and adjust the guarantee because the revenues that had been projected to be there aren't. But we've still got year-over-year growth. How you allocate that growth is always an issue. The split has been roughly, I think, about 89% K through 12, 9% to community colleges. But within that, if you've got some suggestions that you'd like to pass on, I'd be more than happy to share this with
Of course, we'd love to propose more Prop 98 coming to community colleges, but I know I have friends here in the audience in K-12.
No, actually, we scheduled HD so they leave, they're gone. So
one of the myths that I should probably blow up is that unlike Washington, I have worked for this has been noted for several administrations. I know most of the buildings around this complex in the Capitol. I have yet to be able to find a printing press. Believe me, we've had times when we really wanted one. We can print some money, but we can't do that. So, that's why I talk about things like the effects of the stock market on revenues, because by God, when things are going good, they're going great. I mean, the 99 and the 2000 years were just, it was rainbows and unicorns, and things couldn't go wrong, and we're going to do all these great things, and then bam, it turned like that. And when the stock market turns fast, as it did in 01, and it definitely did in 08, the plummeting that we saw in state revenues was immediate and it was severe. And so that begs one of the questions is well, why doesn't the legislature, why doesn't the governor change the revenue structure in the state? If things are so volatile on the personal income tax side, why don't you lower your reliance on personal income tax and say spread it out? Put more of your tax base into sales tax or corporation tax. That's been tried a couple of times since in the years, so many to count right now, that I've been around. And I'll tell you one thing is that under the Schwarzenegger era, there was an attempt to do what they call base broadeners, to broaden out the sales tax to go to a variety of different services. I was the governor's spokesman at that time when he proposed broadening the sales tax exemption. I will give you one example. One of the areas that he proposed broadening it to was veterinary services. I never knew how many veterinary publications there were in the state until we proposed that, because why do you want to tax Fluffy and Fido? They didn't cause this budget problem. And so once you broaden it, I only say that I do love dogs and cats. But I say that just because, as an example, once you try to broaden the base of sales tax to an industry that currently is not taxed under sales tax, like legal services or sporting tickets, then the opposition to that is immediate and is intense. So institutionally, that has been in the past one of the things that has prevented the state, if it wanted to go into that, from trying to broaden out, lessen the reliance on personal income tax and the volatility that's kind of built into it with our dot-com economy. And to to broaden it out with something that is less volatile like sales tax. So, and I do love dogs and cats. Yes,
One
sir.
final question. Well, I guess we can
I
do two real
I
quick.
defer to him.
No, just two real quick. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Real quick, can you speak to Governor Brown's bullet train project and where that money's coming from and how much it costs?
The high-speed rail project is being financed through a variety of sources. One of them is the cap and trade proceeds that is dealing with low carbon transportation. The other is through bonds that are being that the voters approved under the High-Speed Rail Act. There are about $1.4 billion worth of bonds that are going to be sold next month by the state treasurer's office. There's the issue of federal support for this. I don't think I'm telling anybody something they don't know, where there's a lot of opposition. On the one hand, there's opposition in Congress to this, and frankly from a number of members of the California delegation, Representative McCarthy being one of them, I believe Representative Denham is another, and the issue of what's going on with federal dollars in terms of electrifying the segment of high-speed rail that would go from the Bay Area to San Jose. So the governor is still convinced that it is a very important, very worthwhile long-term infrastructure project in the state. It's got a lot of challenges, and the governor, I think, is fairly resolute in his ongoing support. What's going to happen in Washington, again, another one of those known unknowns like healthcare that we don't know about.
That's why we're here.
I'm all ears on financial solutions.
Always good to hear that. So, with balanced budgets and looking at the graph there, is the reason that that's always only a balanced budget because the budget isn't actually balanced, or is cost
No, I
and
think-
expenses being just being pushed to the
I'll
future?
I don't have the exact numbers to go with other than this chart illustrates it. What I was talking about is when we saw the dot-com boom take off in 1999 and 2000, Silicon Valley, the personal stock options went through the roof. You had valuations of companies where the ink was still wet on the paper, but they were trading mightily. If any of you are San Francisco Giants fans, they used to have the cup holders when they opened AT&T Park, and they all sit in the back. Webvan came and went in about 2 years because all of those things, there were startups that everybody wanted to invest in. When the market decided, no, these things aren't great long-term investments, and the market collapsed, all of those one-time revenues that were associated with those stock options evaporated. That's on the revenue side. What happened here on the expenditure side is that collectively the legislature and the administration at that time were of the view that this is going to be a long-term good run. And what they wanted to do, what they chose to do at that time, was say, we want to expand state programs, we want to have higher level of benefits, we want those benefits to be ongoing in nature, again, for very good and altruistic reasons. But what happened was when the dot-com boom went spectacularly bust, and those one-time revenues stopped riding the rocket, but they crashed and evaporated, you still had higher ongoing levels of general fund spending that could not be sustained once those one-time revenues were removed. And so that was what created the dot-com bust and the recession in the early part of the 2000s that took a number of years to get out of. And that's why the Governor Brown, being mindful of that, has said, we don't know what's coming around the corner for a lot of the reasons that this is a lot of charts the governor uses in talking to the press about this. We don't know what's going to happen with stock market. We don't know what's going to happen in Washington. We don't know how long the expansion is going to go. All the reasons that we ought to be really careful on the expenditure side and not commit the state to ongoing higher levels of general fund spending that, as we've seen in the past because of the economic cycle, may not be able to be sustained over the long haul.
Great. Thanks, HT.